Hello, private investigators. My name is Derek Smith from the Intercessors Private Investigations and Training Group, and today I want to give you 6 tips on interviewing for private investigators. Now, private investigators interview people for a number of different reasons. They could be conducting interviews for something as benign as a background check, or they could be interviewing to get information about a crime or a missing person. But with that said, most private investigators will agree that no matter the purpose of the interview, interviewing a subject is an art. It's not always easy to get the information you need out of a person. However, with the right interviewing techniques and questions, you can usually get the information that you seek. To make things easier for PIs, I pulled together some tips and input from experienced private investigators that's going to help you get what you need out of a subject during your interview. Number 1 is to prepare. It's best to have done research into the subject and situation, like the crime, the circumstances of the missing person, the background, things like that, so that you're not going into the interview room with the subject knowing more than you do. Knowing who you are interviewing and their role in the investigation is critical, as is knowing what questions to ask. Those questions vary depending on the investigation, but having a thorough understanding of the situation can point you in the right direction. As a federal agent and as a private investigator, I've done many investigations, and I've done some pre-employment background investigations for my various law enforcement agencies that I work for. And I've had to interview candidates, including their partners, their family members, and neighbors, as well as their current and former employers, to get more information about them. And I found that some of these people intentionally lie or they omit information. Some omit that information by accident. Some don't think some information is relevant or important. It helps to have a lot of the answers to questions before you start asking them, which helps you to determine if they're lying. The more information you have going into an interview, the more you'll be able to test your subjects and the reliability of their answers. Coming to the interview room prepared puts you as the investigator in a position to know the answers to the questions you're asking and determine if a subject is lying. Even if a subject is confirmed to be lying, knowing that they lied and their motive behind doing that can give you an important lead in your investigation. Here's the thing, everybody lies, and I mean everybody. You're going to read 100 lies today, and you're probably going to tell about 10 lies yourself. The key is knowing which lies are important and why they're telling them to you. Number 2 is establish rapport and be polite. While certainly there are circumstances in which a stronger approach may be warranted, I recommend you having a more level-headed approach. The thing when it comes to investigations and interviewing is rapport, and more rapport. Being polite can make the job easy for you. In contrast, if you're going to take that tough guy act or tough woman act, just know that that's unnecessary most of the time. When you do this, you instead discourage or irritate your interviewee, and that won't be good for you or anybody else. Like they say, it's easier to catch flies with honey than with vinegar. And for many investigators, this rings true in the interview room as well. Never ask questions in point form, making it feel like an actual interview. Use a discussion-based strategy. Let your subjects speak for themselves. With experience, you're going to develop a strategy called beat around the bush until your subject is comfortable enough to give you the answers to what you're looking for. Taking the time to have an actual conversation with your subject is going to make them feel heard and therefore more likely to share information with you. When I'm doing my interviews, I'm never direct about my questions, especially when I'm expecting lies from them as the answers. If I ever do need a direct answer to a question, always build up to it. You cannot start an interview with, "Are you the murderer?" That doesn't make sense, now does it? The answer is going to be no 99% of the time. You might have 1% that might say something, but I doubt it. While it may seem like a waste of time, a subject is going to rarely reveal anything of importance without some sort of trust built between you and them. Number 3 is listen with a poker face. While interviewing a subject, you may wonder if you're asking the right questions. While you absolutely need to ask appropriate questions, often it's not so much about what they're asking as it is about what the subject is saying. One key to a good interview is to listen to the subject and do so without giving away what you're thinking. Some investigators are so impressed with themselves for coming up with such phenomenal questions that they never shut up and let the person answer the question. Don't ask 500 questions because you think they're great. Try to ask 3 questions that's going to get you the answers that's going to add meat to your investigation. You need to listen more than you speak. I would caution you to focus on your listening skills if you want to be a good investigator. The subject of your interview is going to fill in pregnant pauses, they're called. Don't answer your question for them. Give them a moment. Pauses are okay. Pause for a moment. Let them think about your question and give you an answer. And finally, don't show any reaction to any nefarious comments. If there are issues, address them last or circle back to them. If you react harshly to the first previously known or developed nefarious information, you're going to intimidate the subject from providing additional information later. If you're in a rush to do the talking, you may not have been leaving enough time for the subject to fully answer your question. It's also wise to observe your subject's level of intelligence. Never assume you're the smartest person in the room. Learn to control your emotions and your facial instructions. Many of these people have been in that seat before, and they know how to read you as well. Additionally, don't be afraid of being quiet. People are naturally uncomfortable with silence. I told you pauses are okay. Ask the question and then to shut up. People will answer the question and then they'll pause. If you wait a bit longer, they normally add info because they feel they didn't answer your question because you're not saying anything. That's when you get the good information. If you ever observe a couple on a first date, they don't stop yapping versus an old married couple who can sit quietly and just enjoy each other's company. Allow the subject to fill the silence if they feel they need to. Ultimately, as an investigator, you should listen carefully for clues and not give away your reactions to what you've learned. Number 4, I want to talk about behavior and body language. It's important for you to know what to expect when it comes to body language. Understanding the most telltale signs of typical nervousness versus being untruthful can prove to be valuable in your investigation. Body language and facial expressions can tell you a lot. You have to take notice of culture and environment. You have to learn body language. You have to learn breathing. And always ask questions you know are going to be answered correctly before you ask the tough questions. Watch the subject and learn the words they use. As a special agent, I took a course in handwriting analysis. It's not used that much anymore, but you can ask questions and have the questions answered in writing. After a while, you'll be able to use those writings as a gauge to do follow-up interviews. It's vital that you keep track of the context of the case and your surroundings, as well as how the subject interacts with those factors. By not only listening to the subject, but also paying attention to their behavior, you can interpret important tales that give clues to the real story and get you closer to closing the case. Number 5 is document and record. Another important tip I can give you is to document and or record your interview. Be cognizant of recording consent laws, as you may need consent to record depending on the laws of your state or your province. However, having a record of the interview with video or audio whenever possible can prove to be incredibly valuable for your investigation. Not only can you look back at the interview, but other investigator associates of yours can review and offer their input as well. Additionally, a record of the interview gives you the ability to go back and rewatch or re-listen to it, perhaps catching information that you missed when the interview was occurring. Finally, be sure to follow up. There's nothing wrong with conducting a second interview if it's necessary. And finally, though this does depend on the type of case, recordings can be beneficial in future court proceedings as well. You should take notes to document important statements during your interview in case you can use them as evidence later on. And finally, number 6, I want to talk about interviewing for today and tomorrow. Now, one advantage you have over potentially difficult subjects is the ability to advance and refine your interviewing skills. You can do this by networking with other investigators and sharing their techniques, reading, observing, and participating in training programs. Many private investigators hail training programs as the gold standard in interviewing training. I also recommend that you pick up a book called Spy the Lie. It's helpful as well. Although many interviewing techniques are learned through experience, there's something to be said for going the extra mile. And speaking of going the extra mile, I want to mention my private investigator career course. I have entire sections in my course on how to conduct an interview. If you want to do more than just pass your state's requirements for becoming a private investigator and learn how to really investigate a case, you want to check out my private investigator career course. Also, if you don't have all the experience you need to be a private investigator, you might want to start with my process server career course as well. You can find the link to those below. Hopefully you got something out of these 6 interviewing tips, and I'll see you on my next video.